We
Got a
already
spinning
were.
wheel.
It's like
It
2 seconds ago
says
we were
that we
live,
are live.
and two
Welcome to the
seconds later
show,
we'll be live.
everyone. Welcome to my introduction where Paul Puey just chit-chatters all over the intro because that's what we do backstage. Paul, welcome to the show. It's delightful having you here, as always, on coinwatch.
It's always a pleasure joining you every Friday for another Coin Watch episode. We've changed it a little bit today.
A little bit, we're changing it. So generally we look at
Tiny bit.
two coins. We dive into them, we explain how they work, all the technical details, the history of it, the roadmap, where we think it's going in the future. And then we choose between them which one we're each going to invest $100 in. This week, we're just going to focus on one coin. It's going to be a shorter episode.
Not the one coin. Not one coin from like 2015. Just so clarification, we're not talking about one coin.
Too soon. Too soon. We should talk about that one day, not on CoinWatch, on a different episode of How to Spot Scams. But today we're talking about Tezos. We're deep diving into it. There's a lot to cover. In fact, in the news a week ago, Tezos just settled their 3-year litigation battle with a class action lawsuit against them that was started in 2017. They just settled that for $25 million. So we can chat a little bit about that as well, but I really want to dive into how Tezos works.
What is
it? There's a lot to cover in here.
Right.
Welcome to the show, everyone. It's so wonderful to have you here. Uva's just posted a link for all of you. It's my Cointree link. If you guys have a question for us that you would like answered on the show, or just a comment that you want to shout out, send a message to cointr.ee/Naomi Brockwell, and that'll pop up like a super chat for me, so I'll be able to answer that. Let's dive into it, Paul. Let's just get started. So Tezos, first of all, like a broad overview, what is it?
At a high level, to people that are familiar with Bitcoin and Ethereum, it's trying to be the better Ethereum. Smart contract language, solving performance, which almost every Ethereum competitor is trying to solve, be the faster, cheaper type of Ethereum, but then really inspired by the challenges of Bitcoin and governance. And this was actually written back before Ethereum was launched, or at least the proposal by Arthur Breitman was in the white paper. He actually wrote it anonymously, similar to Satoshi writing the white paper anonymously. But he came out unlike Satoshi and said, hey, I'm the guy that wrote this thing. But it was trying to solve governance and actually give a default to who should decide what happens to the protocol. And that's kind of one of its core differentiators. One of the things that I do like about it is its proof of stake model. Not that it is proof of stake specifically, but the way they do proof of stake. And maybe a lot of people are familiar with DPoS from EOS, where you got to have a whole bunch of money, or Dash, where you have a whole bunch of money, you stake it, you become a node that can determine which transactions are valid, and you get rewarded for it.
Yeah. And let's talk,
these,
we'll dive into specifically about the proof of stake, because I think it's interesting. I actually did an interview with Arthur Breitman on Monday, who's co-founder of Tezos. And we kind of dived into the technicalities a bit. If you guys want to watch that, then that's available to all MBTV members. So head over to the members page. If someone wants to post that link, that will be super. And you can watch that. But one thing that he was very specific mentioning is people call this delegated proof of stake. But as these terms start to evolve and we have specific meanings of what these things mean, what we understand as delegated proof of stake, the thing that EOS has, for example, this isn't what Tezos has. They have something
Very
that's
different.
Liquid proof of stake, which is kind of, these evolving terms that we have to keep up with. So we'll dive into that in a little bit. But that's a great overview. So it's basically kind of Ethereum. It's this platform where you can build smart contracts on it, but it has this inbuilt governance model, which is super important, because you look at all these forks that happen, there's no way to integrate changes without a lot of disruption and politicking. So the idea with Tezos is, how do we minimize that? How do we just take away the human element and just make it a community consensus? So you were just you were explaining, I interrupted, you were explaining about the proof of stake and that. So go ahead and keep going.
So one of the unique things about Tezos, which I learned when we were looking at integrating it, is the way they do proof of stake, and this what they call liquid proof of stake. So what people are more accustomed to prior to Tezos is a proof of stake model where you need a lot of money, like in Dash. I think you need 1,000 Dash that you stake into a machine that then sees transactions and verifies transactions or votes in some way, shape, or form. Now that does make it very limiting for everyone else to benefit from that proof of stake model. Then came a delegated model where you don't have to be the one entity that stakes, or not the one, but one of the few entities that stakes a lot of money. You can delegate your staking to another entity. However, you usually have a minimum amount that you have to delegate, or that money is locked, meaning that you can't use it. The cool thing about Tezos, what they do is they have this liquid proof of stake model where I can simply say my address, my Tezos account, I'm going to delegate my staking to this baker. That's the term they use, as a baker. It's not kind of a node. It's just simply a baker. This whole analogy with baking and bread and whatnot is pretty common inside of Tezos. So I delegate my account to a baker. Now, whenever I receive money into that account, that baker is now staking my money automatically. But I can spend that money right away. I can receive a single unit of Tezos. I can send half a unit out. I can receive another 3 in. I can send out 2. And whatever amount of Tezos I happen to have at that time is how much is delegated to the baker that I've chosen. And then I can switch bakers if I want to. So it's really, really liquid. It doesn't have an overbearing user experience in order to specifically delegate, and it doesn't force me to lock up funds. Now, that's great from the user experience point of view to the end user. I can fluidly use my funds, but of course, it doesn't give that same level of lockup that you would want to increase the price of the coin. So that's where, a lot of coins introduce staking really to drive value to the coin, as opposed to the true purpose, which is to verify transactions and have people, put money into the verification of transactions.
Right. And do we want to talk about like what the whole point of, because you alluded to it there, like what the point of the staking is and what people get. Like if I were to stake my money, for example, I can either not stake my money and it sits there and there's inflation in the coin. That's how rewards get distributed. Or I can stake it, and depending on where I stake with, I can earn between 5 and like 7.5% or something like that. So, the idea is that you want to be active with this money. You want to be staking it. You want to be looking for good rates, because you can actually end up making money and beating the inflation amount and earning more in your tokens, which is kind of cool.
Yep, exactly. So the staking rewards come from the inflation, entirely from the inflation. So there are about 760 million Tezos that were initially created, kind of the initial supply, and that was kind of given out to investors, the foundation, employees, staff, kind of your typical ICO. And just a little bit of history. This was the biggest ICO at the time it had launched. It was shooting for a $20 million ICO, and it raised 232 million back in they timed it perfectly, right smack center in the middle of 2017, when anyone and everyone was looking for the next hot ICO to get into, and they timed it perfectly. As you mentioned, there's a lot of drama around that, and I'll let you cover the drama. I'll cover the technicals.
All right.
But after the 760 million, about 5.5% of that initial supply is created every year. So it has an inflation rate of about 5.5% of the initial supply, not of the current supply. And that goes pretty evenly across to the bakers, dependent on how much they stake. And the nice thing is, not everybody stakes. And so you're actually getting more than 5.5% going to the bakers, because not all tokens are staked. So if only one Tezos was staked, it would get all 5.5% of the inflation, but obviously a good amount. And from what I've heard, I talked to one of the primary business development guys over at Tezos, and he said about 70 to 80% of the liquid Tezos is actually staked. So you're getting a little bit over 5.5% pro rata for how much you're staking.
It's kind of like you're benefiting. Yeah, you're benefiting from the people who aren't being active in the network, because more is going to be distributed to you.
Exactly. In a way, you're also hedging against the inflation. It's not really a hedge, but yes, the inflation causes the monetary supply to increase, but because you're getting that supply, you are effectively not affected by inflation. It's as if the Federal Reserve printed money, but all of the money was evenly distributed to all the people that already had money. Right? It's almost that way. Now, there is one caveat, is that unless you're a baker, you're not going to get all of that. And a baker will typically take some percentage of the total reward. And that's where you kind of can shop around for the different bakers, who's reputable, who's not, how much of a reward will they give you. Now, one cool thing is when you stake with a baker, your funds are not at risk at all. You're delegating the stake, but the baker can't run away with your money. It's not like you're giving it to somebody to say, hey, stake this for me. You're delegating it directly to them. And even better, and this is an interesting detail I found out, if the baker themselves were to do something bad, basically like verify an invalid transaction, the equivalent of what a miner would do and lose a block, like they solve a block, but it's invalid, they would lose the reward. If a baker were to do that and have funds staked, the only funds that get slashed are the baker's own funds, not the funds of the people that delegate to them. So there's really, really low risk in staking with a baker. The main risk, and this is the part that's not on chain, that's not automatic, is that the baker has to manually push funds to you that are owed to you based on your agreement with them. So if they say, hey, we're going to take a 10% cut of the rewards and give the rest back to our users, well, you have to trust them to do that, right?
Yeah.
And they collect the reward directly on their address, and then they push it to the users. And if they don't do that, run away with the money. That's the risk that you take.
Yeah, and that's why reputation system is so important in this. There are lots of great websites that list all the different people who are baking, as you said, what their reputation is, what their uptime is, how often they have their computer online, what their fees are, et cetera, et cetera. So it's really cool because I like that market element of, it is individual responsibility. You do have to check around in the market and find a good deal and find someone that's reputable. And I think that's kind of cool. Do we want to talk about, so we mentioned it briefly, this idea of delegated proof of stake, but then liquid proof of stake. Maybe go into that a little more, because this idea of delegated proof of stake, something like EOS, for example, they have this system where you give your money and it's kind of locked up with these people, and if you don't like the decisions that they're making and the things that they're doing, then it's difficult to move. Like, you've put your money in there, but Tezos is different. Do you want to explain that a little bit, and like how easy it is to kind of move funds around?
So the staking is completely independent of the flow of funds. So whatever funds you currently have in your account will automatically be staked with the baker that you have specified. You do a specific Tezos transaction on the blockchain that says, with this specific account, my public key or public address, I delegate this other public address to stake for me. And that's it. And then you're done. And then you just simply send and receive from your account as much as you want, right? You send, receive. And the network just simply, with each block, looks at how much you have at the time of that block and says, okay, well, that's how much the baker has, and that's what their share of the reward will be from the total pool that is staked. So it really makes it simple to implement staking, especially I appreciate that from a UI point of view. We're looking at adding Tezos staking into Edge, and it won't introduce, thanks for the vote, but it won't introduce a whole lot of new UI. You don't have to say, okay, here's my balance staked and here's my unstaked balance, which you frequently have to do with a lot of other staking coins. And here's the amount that's locked up, and here's a special operation to unlock the coins. It's just simply, choose a baker that you're going to stake with, and then you're done, right? Or change it to another baker. So I do appreciate that from the user experience point of view. And as I had mentioned, I really like that the user experience and getting people to stake and put funds at stake to validate the network is actually more important than just purely staking to increase the coin value, which is a purpose of staking as well. Because when you lock up funds, people can't trade those funds. And when people can't trade those funds, obviously there's lower sell pressure into the market, which increases the price of the coin. The way Tezos has done it, it doesn't affect the sell pressure at all. Right, I can have funds in a wallet that's staked and just sell them on at an instant. So I like that trade-off that they had chosen.
One thing
unselfish trade-off.
Yeah, one thing I do want to mention, sort of this comparison with Ethereum, which I think is interesting, because Tezos was designed to be this platform where it's like a smart contract platform, but it has this self-governing model. And I look at Ethereum right now, and so many of the coins we've covered in the past few weeks have been based on Ethereum. They are C20 tokens, so a variant. And the problem with Ethereum right now is gas fees are crazy, and it's so expensive, to use these things. Like, we're going through a DeFi boom right now, and there's lots of different smart contract applications and things. People love this stuff right now, and Ethereum scaling solution is like a couple of years out, right?
Mm-hmm.
They are moving to a proof of stake model, but when that's going to happen, we don't really know. They've only started phase 0. It's this long process. So I'm looking at things like Tezos thinking, okay, is this going to be an interesting substitute? Because it's very interesting, like the code, the programming language that they've chosen to write in is conducive to smart contracts. It's a great language for building that. And then you've got proof of stake, which is going to be a lot cheaper, a lot less energy draining, I guess the word is.
Yeah, energy cost.
To operate the blockchain. So what are your thoughts on that? Do you see Tezos as being this potential for this ripe DeFi grounds that we're looking at right now?
So actually, I have a fairly strong opinion about proof of stake as a scaling mechanism. Like, does it solve scaling? I fundamentally believe it does not. It does not at all solve scaling. So if you think about scaling, what is the problem and what are you trying to solve? So think about Bitcoin and Ethereum. The problem is you're sending a bunch of transactions to the network, and all of the nodes and all of the miners, or even all of the validators in a proof of stake model, have to verify the transaction. And there's a cost to verifying the transaction. It's running all of the code in the smart contract and then getting the result. And in the case of Bitcoin, it's verifying the transaction is not spending funds that are already spent, and that there's a certain amount of proof of work. But the verification of those transactions increases the more transactions there are. It's as simple as that. If there's more transactions, there's more work to do. And that's independent of being proof of stake or proof of work. With proof of work, you do a certain amount of mining power, but that mining power is completely independent of the number of transactions you can process. Right? I put in a certain amount of hashing in order to mine, and that's dependent on the difficulty. It's not dependent on the number of transactions. So Bitcoin today could drop to one transaction, an hour, but there's still the same amount of mining difficulty. Or it could potentially scale to, giant 10, 50 megabyte, 100 megabyte blocks if you're BSV, but you're still paying the same amount in hashing power. So proof of stake does one thing, which in a way is scaling, but not. It makes confirmations faster. It makes it such that you don't have to wait for a block. You don't have to wait for all this hashing and mining power to confirm a transaction. And you'll see a lot of proof of stake chains have confirmation times down to the seconds versus the minutes.
I mean, one question that I would ask you is, doesn't it bring down costs as well? In that if we're judging costs and transaction fees and all of this by like, what do the miners need in order to break even? And so you're just seeing fees ramp up because, it seems like there are maybe a couple of factors in there. Maybe you'll disagree with this, which I love your opinion on, but it seems like when you're dealing with the transaction fees, you're dealing with, miners factoring in how much energy is consuming and whether it's in their whether it's worthwhile financially for them to be mining and whether they need to charge fees on top of that. But you're also dealing with the number of transactions in there. So, I mean, would you say that it's a way for bringing down costs, or doesn't it work out that way?
I would say that it's not, because there are two independent effects on cost. One is the difficulty for mining so it does compete with mining difficulty cost because it does cost money to expend energy to mine. But that is orthogonal and completely separate to the cost of verifying a transaction. And as the cost of verify a transaction goes up, that becomes the cost that you care about. Like, you have to run stronger computers to verify 1 million transactions than to verify 5 transactions. And that's where the mining fees are going up. That's the reason mining fees are going up. It's not because of the difficulty. It's not because of the difficulty to mine. And so when you move to a proof of stake model, yes, a single block, verifying a block doesn't require any hashing power anymore, but it still requires all of the same cryptography and verification of transactions that it always has. And if you ramp that up to 1 million transactions per second, you'll still incur that same cost, whether or not you're proof of stake or proof of work. So I think the key thing that Ethereum is doing, which is taking a long time and is a hard thing to do that many blockchains haven't done, with probably the exception of Harmony, which maybe we'll talk about another day, is sharding, right? That is really a true solution to scaling, because you take that work and you split it up across different nodes. So all the nodes aren't doing all the work. Instead, some work is done by one node, some work is done by another. And you're kind of a divide and conquer solution. And that's really a true scaling solution. And I think that, it's just simply hard because it's a distributed network. Do you trust what someone else is doing if you're not doing it yourself? But I think it's the one, it's the way going forward. In the meantime, yeah, you can use Tezos because there's not many transactions on it. So it's going to be cheap.
Yeah.
I believe it was 20,000 transactions happened last month. So barely any transactions per second.
Right.
So yeah, it's cheap for now. They are working on sharding. So I haven't talked to the developers. Sharding is looking to get added. It's being researched, but I'm presuming it's nowhere close to the amount of effort that has been put into sharding on Ethereum.
Right. I've got a couple of super chats here that I want to mention. So Anthony Monajo said, hello, Naomi, great to see you. Do you plan to use the Hyper platform anytime soon? I haven't looked into it. I will check that out, Anthony. A few people have mentioned that, so it seems like something I will take a look, but I really appreciate your support. And they got a super chat from Uvers who said, how long has Tezos been around? So they had their ICO in 2017. So I believe 2016 were they starting, like they were on the radar, but then 2014. We're at 2014.
So the earliest sign of Tezos was the original white paper by the anonymized Arthur Breitman in 2014. Yeah. And I think that was due to the governance issue. Hey, he was really trying to solve the governance problem of Bitcoin. And at the time, Ethereum wasn't really out. So it was really inspired by the governance issue of Bitcoin. And nothing really happened until, the big boom of ICOs. And that probably was the big opportunity for Tezos to raise a bunch of money, and they did. So yeah, 2017 is when they ICO'd. And I believe it was also 2017 when they did their beta net launch. Actually, no, 2018. So 2018, summer of 2018, June of 2018 is when they launched beta net, which is really mainnet. They were just saying, hey, be careful. It's early. Let's let this sit around. But these are actually mainnet coins. And then they called it mainnet in September of 2018 when it was full, like, hey, production quality, go ahead and use it.
Right. So I wanted to, because we're going to wrap up in a second here, I wanted to just get your broad overview of this. So you mentioned that you're not convinced that it's necessarily better at scaling at this stage.
Yeah.
It currently doesn't have the network effect of Ethereum. I think that they were really mired by this legal battle they've been in that has only just now ended. So I personally am excited to see what happens now. A lot of people have been hesitant to build on Tezos, I think, because they just didn't know what was going to happen. This has been like a long ongoing battle. There's a journalist, Liu, I can't remember his first name, who basically said that these lawsuits that were brought forward, is a bunch of unethical people who really brought down a project. Needlessly slowed down a project. The lawyers walked away with $8.5 million of the settlement.
Yeah, so a third of the settlement.
Yeah, people would have been better off if they just held their Tezos until now. Much better off, because Tezos has really gone up in price, especially since the start of the year. So I would like to see what they come up with. Now going forward, seeing as that battle is now completely behind them as of last Friday. But what are your thoughts? I'd love your overview of all this.
I feel like to complete my thoughts, I'd have to go into what they claim is, there were three main differentiators they talked about. The staking model being one, the governance model being a second. And we didn't really cover that too much, but then also the staking model, the governance model. What was the last one I was trying to think? The language.
And
right.
Let's mention the governance model a little more, because I think that's important to delve into. It seems that it makes it a much more decentralized process when you have on-chain governance, because everyone can participate. You're delegating your coins to whoever you want to represent your point of view. There's no single entity, like a point of failure of someone saying, okay, I will implement the code now, thanks to the community's opinion. It's all automated. So there is no human element in there that could be corrupted and, shut down or anything. So I'd love your thoughts on the governance.
Yes, the governance model, after learning about it in gory detail, I found it's not solving the human element, but it's making a default. It's creating a default as to who can choose what happens to the protocol. Think about Bitcoin. There is no default as far as advancing the protocol. It's a mix of a bunch of things. There's core developers that own the main repository that makes changes, that's run in most nodes. Then there's the actual node operators. They have control as well. And then there's the exchanges, which assign the ticker of what is BTC. Well, they have control as well. And then there's users that can actually choose to buy or sell the coin versus a fork. They have control over as well. And no one really knows how much control each of these entities have.
Right.
It's a little bit unknown, but it actually is quite distributed in that sense and somewhat decentralized. It's just that you don't quite know how much. With Tezos, you know exactly, because it's strictly a vote of someone with coins. They stake coins to a baker, and the baker gets to choose which protocols get adopted. And the interesting thing about Tezos is it's literally the actual code that would update the node. So someone literally puts the code on the blockchain, and people vote, do I want that code to become the new code that the protocol runs on? And if they say yes, boom, that automatically updates the code. And actually the nodes don't have to do anything. There's nothing for them to download. It's kind of like the app in your phone. It's like the app on your phone that just kind of automatically updates. That's basically what they built into Tezos, for better or worse, because sometimes people don't like their software automatically updating.
Well, this does some interesting thing called like a hot swap, where it switches out the code, which is kind of cool.
It's pretty much downloading from like an app, in a way, an app store, but the app store is the blockchain, and then just, restarting it. Like it's basically shut down the node and restart it with a new code. And the entire community of Tezos holders votes on that. So it's strictly Tezos holders. Whereas in the Bitcoin community, it's partially the people that hold Bitcoin, because they vote by not holding it if they don't like what's going to happen. But it's also a bunch of other things. So they've given us a single straightforward default, but as admitted by folks at Tezos, that doesn't prevent a fork. It doesn't stop me as maybe a baker from saying, no, I don't want to update to this protocol update, even though the majority of people said so. I'm going to change the code inside of my node to say, don't accept this protocol, even though it's supposed to. And if enough people do that, you can cause a fork. Now, then it goes back to, well, what are the exchanges going to deem as, XTZ? Is it going to be this code that I changed, or is it what people voted on, blah, blah, blah. And so it still has at its heart that same human element problem, but it's at least given us a default decision that you have to go through more effort to kind of sway otherwise, to differentiate from. So I do like that. It does streamline the governance, but it's definitely not bulletproof.
Right, for sure. All right, so back to those three elements that you mentioned and your general take on this, and then the ultimate question, Paul.
Yeah, so the three elements, the language, I don't think the language is a big selling point. They raise that we have a better language that's more error proof, but a language is just an interface on top of a computer, right? We have hundreds of languages on top of regular computers. You choose whatever fits you best. In Ethereum, it happens to be Solidity, which is in a way a poor language. It's error prone, but that doesn't stop someone from building a different language that still compiles into the EVM of Ethereum. And when there's a will, there's a way. So I don't think that should be a selling point of a chain. So overall, I think it's a great project. I think they're the better starting point of Ethereum. Like, if Ethereum were to start and it was Tezos, that would be a much better starting point. But the network effect behind Ethereum and the, I think, smaller differentiator between Ethereum and Tezos has me inclined to say, at least on this round, unless we maybe cover another coin in the future and I say no to that one and I'll go get Tezos instead. On this round, I'm going to say, I'm not going to acquire any additional Tezos.
Right.
I'll say that. I'm not going to acquire any additional $100 of Tezos than what I already have.
Right. Yeah, I would say my takeaway is I was so disappointed when people filed the class action lawsuit. It's a greedy space, right? I expected it. It's the height of 2017, and a bunch of people thought that they could get money from these people who were just trying to create this decentralized tech and, make cool things. And it breaks my heart to see them just like the energy completely focused on this legal battle for 3 years. I look at a project that still has whose assets, so they raised like $232 million. It's now grown to over $600 million that they now have as reserve. War chest. I look at that and I think, okay, now that the legal battle is over, I wonder how the foundation is going to use that money. I wonder what cool projects they might entice over there, what interesting development you might start to see. You mentioned the network effect. I agree, it's not there yet. You really don't have the projects that Ethereum has. But I do wonder what's going to happen in the future, and I'm excited about that. That being said, I already own Tezos. So as you mentioned, so I'm not going to buy an extra $100 of this, but I am happy with the Tezos that I currently own. Maybe I'll go in harder later on, but that's my takeaway.
Yeah, I'm going to make
Yeah.
a note of the ones that I say no to, each week. And if
And
I
how
say
much
no
you
to another
really
one, and
cost.
how I might actually know how I'm going to say something like, I think in the future I'll say, okay, I'm going to say no to this coin. I'm going to take that $100 and put it into that coin that I said no to in the past, because I think
Yeah.
maybe that now has a little bit more hope. So keep
Yeah.
revisiting some of these earlier projects and say, oh, I think there might be a turning point.
Yeah. We should
I
make
think
like a
Tezos is one of
website
those.
that shows our portfolio of
Yeah.
$100. Let's have a competition. Like,
Charting it.
versus Paul. I'm just like closing my eyes and like throwing darts.
Oh God, it does feel like a bit dart throw, especially some of these. Oh gosh, not
Yeah.
trading advice, people. Not trading advice.
Yeah, for sure. So everyone, that is the show today. I hope that this has given you a
Cool.
better idea of what Tezos is. It's, there's a lot going on in the crypto space, so it's really hard for people to understand all of these different projects. So Paul, I really appreciate your time and your expertise as CEO of
Love
Edgewell.
joining.
Deal with so many
love joining.
coins. You have to deal with them in depth and, learn how to implement them in your wallet. And so you're just such a valuable resource because you kind of do have that bird's eye view of a lot of things going on.
As you are a very valuable resource. Thank you, Naomi, for covering and talking to so many people in the space and giving us information both on the kind of deep technical side, the marketing side, and the personality side of all these people you talk to. So, and Thank you for all your content.
Yeah, and so to summarize, everyone, as I mentioned, I did an interview with Arthur Breitman on Monday, who's the co-founder of Tezos. If you'd like his point of view, he actually said some things about sharding that you might be interested in, that maybe a little bit controversial, actually. So if you guys wanted to check that out, I've just posted a link on in the chat there. Thank you all for being here. Thank you to everyone who sent us super chat. Love you all. Go and have a wonderful rest of your day. Chat to you later.
Great weekend.
Great weekend. Da, da, da.